Hi everyone, my name is Carrie. You may know me as K Warning or from my shop 8-Bit Stitch. Today I want to talk to you guys about actual cross stitches, actual stitches, types of stitches in cross stitching. So obviously the main stitch is going to be the cross stitch. What does that mean? That means you are crossing one side of the thread over the other side of the thread to make an X. Now, remember from the last video, each square on the Aida is going to be a symbol on your pattern. So each of those symbols is going to be an individual stitch. If we take a look at the Aida, you'll see that one stitch is made up of 4 different holes. First, we're gonna go over the motions of the stitch. So you're gonna go from the back, up one hole of the Aida, come through the front, and come back down through the diagonal hole in the Aida. That is actually called a half stitch. If you're working on smaller count Aida, you could continue this throughout, just not complete your stitches. Again, that's called a half stitch, which can be fine in some cases if you're looking for more of like a sketched look, or again, if you're working on a smaller count Aida where just a half stitch can kind of fill the space of the squares. So to complete the actual cross stitch, you'll come back up through the back side of the Aida, and then again, come through the front and down the diagonal hole in the Aida. So I'm gonna give you a little tip that I wish somebody had given me when I first started cross stitching. If you want your stitches to lay nice and neat and flat and clean, you're gonna wanna choose one way to do your stitch consistently. So for me personally, I like coming through the bottom left hole to the top right hole, and then to finish my stitch, I'll come from the bottom right hole to the top left hole. That means that my stitch is always going this way first, and then this way second. Now I know what some of you might be thinking, I'm working on a piece and I'm trying to do my stitches all the same, but if I come up through the hole that I'm used to, I've already done a stitch and it's undoing the stitch that I've already done. So my tip for you is just to mix it up. You're still gonna make sure your stitches are laying the same way, but instead of coming up through that bottom left first, you'll go up through the top right first and down to the bottom left. You're still creating the same pattern with your stitches and it's still gonna lay nice and flat. So here's another secret for you that might be a little controversial. Some of you are thinking, well, if I'm just coming in and out through the back side any which way to make sure the front lays nice and neat, the back is gonna be so messy. Guess what, guys? The back doesn't matter. Okay, so some of you might have left. And that's fine. If you like having a neat back, great. For me personally, I've been stitching for over 20 years and I just don't care about the back. I'm gonna frame it, I'm gonna finish it nice and neat. You won't even see the back. Sometimes it's even fun to show off your super messy backs. So there definitely are tips and tricks to get the front to lay nice and neat and also to get the back of your piece to also be nice and neat. But unfortunately, you're not gonna find that type of content here. That is the basics of a cross stitch. Now, I already touched on half stitches, obviously. Again, that is just going through and doing half of your stitch and not completing the second half of the stitch. There are also quarter stitches. So if you see a symbol like this, then that is going to be a corner stitch. There are 4 different ways to do a corner stitch depending on where it's oriented in the pattern. So these quarter stitches are used to create more of a smooth curve in the design. So for the corner stitch, you're gonna wanna start in the corner where you do not have the diagonal piece. Sometimes it can be easier on these to use a sharp needle. Then you can get through the center of the square easier than with an embroidery needle. So for example, for this symbol, you're gonna start on this corner. You'll go up through the back side of the Aida, come down through the front in the middle of your square, and then you'll come up the back side again and through the diagonal hole. It's the same way with each of the corner stitches, and I'll show you each corner stitch in relation to the symbol orientation. The last main stitch that you're gonna see in a pattern when you're beginning cross stitch is the backstitch. Backstitch a lot of the time is used for finishing details and outlining. There are two different ways that I personally do backstitching. The first is probably how most people learn, where each square again is going to be an individual stitch. So you'll come up through the back side and immediately go in through the front side. You'll skip down, come up through the back side, and again in through the front side. And I'll repeat that a couple times. Now the different way that I do it, and I mainly do this on letters recently, is to create a long back stitch. I don't know why I prefer it over the short back stitches in some patterns. I'll kind of play around with it a little bit to see how, my thread is showing on the piece. And you guys might get a little sick of me saying this, but honestly, it's personal preference. Try out the short stitch. If you're not liking how choppy it's kind of turning out, try doing this long stitch. So again, you'll come up through the back side in the first hole, you'll skip over to the last stitch in that portion and come in through the front side. And you'll repeat that, skipping the stitches in the middle of the area that needs to be backstitched to create a long stitch. And those are really the main stitches that you're gonna find in a pattern. And I know I can hear some of you whispering, but Carrie, what about a French knot? I think French knots deserve their own video, so that'll come later. I hope you found this video helpful, and until next time, happy stitching.